I mean, I am, I suppose, the figurehead of Sonnox, but I have a great team. The staff here are wonderful. I have a great team working around. So maybe a long way round of saying, I'm happy that the people here are good enough that they can make decisions, they can invent products. The message that behind each piece of software there are real people trying to program, trying to do a good job, trying to earn their salary, trying to pay their mortgage. Chase the dream, go for it, say be patient. These things do not happen overnight. Get your head down and work hard. That hard work will pay off. People who you are looking up to at that time will notice and will appreciate and will reward. Remembering back, I could talk about paper tape, if anybody remembers. Punch paper tape, punch cards, Fortran. I started in those days.
Hello everyone, this is Ray Williams from IMSTA, and today we have another edition of Meet the Developers. Very happy to have Rod Densham here from Sonox Limited, somebody I've known for many years and I consider to be a good friend and colleague. How are you doing, Rod?
Ray, I'm great. It's really nice here. We're in the middle of the English summer. We're waiting for a big music festival this weekend, which I'm going to attend, called Wilderness. So life is good at the moment.
Now, Oxford, of course, is legendary as a place of learning. It's perhaps the most famous university in the world. What is it like to be developing software in Oxford, just as a kind of positional place on the earth, as opposed to developing in another place? What is it like to be developing there?
Oxford itself, Oxford University and Oxford City, I mean, you're right, they do have an aura about them of learning and intelligence. I spent 3 years studying there myself, and it was a very valuable period. Sadly, it was a few years ago now. I'm still located around the area. I still live just north of Oxford. And we set the company up in the countryside. It's about 10 or 12 miles northwest of Oxford City. We're right out in the middle of a countrified area called the Cotswolds. And it's full of hills and trees and rivers and countryside. And we have a barn. The building that we're working in is a converted barn. It was converted about 20 years ago or so. So it's nice and modern. But it's set basically in a field in a big country estate, owned by Lord and Lady Rothermere. And we do get to look out of the windows when we're writing our software, looking at the fields and the sheep and the cows. And it's a lovely place to be. It's very peaceful. It's very quiet. It's very good for concentration. The only thing I would say, I mean, there's always pros and cons about these places. We have the association with Oxford, so we do have bright people surrounding us. It should be easy to get good, clever developers. The one thing which is a little bit ironic is that one of the things we do find difficult is the fact that people want to be in the cities, or should I say younger people want to be in the cities. So we do find a lot of our younger staff, they'll come with us, they'll stay with us for a few years, and then they see the bright lights of London predominantly, and they disappear off to London. And who can blame them? You know, as a young person, who can blame them? Personally, I like the country life. The pace of life is quiet and slow out here, and we can get our heads down. We can concentrate on development and good product.
We're going to delve a little bit into your journey. You were born in England. You're born in the Northeast, Hartlepool, I believe. Tell us about some of those early days.
Yeah, to be pedantic, I was actually born in Leicester, but only for the first 2 or 3 years. Then I moved up to Hartlepool, which, for those of you who know England well, up in the northeast, it's near Newcastle, near Sunderland, near Middlesbrough. And that was my life, my school life, junior school, secondary school. was up there, and very enjoyable period of life. We did actually move from there after I'd finished my O-levels, back in the days when we had O-levels and A-levels and things. I moved down to North Devon, which is almost the exact opposite side of the country, and lived in Barnstaple for 2 or 3 years just to do a bit more schooling, a bit more A-levels. I then moved to London, went to university in London to do a first degree in London in physics, basically fairly straightforward physics degree. So moved around quite a bit. Spent 5 years actually in London, 3 years doing a degree, and then another 2 years doing a couple of odd jobs. One ended up in Saudi Arabia in the middle of the desert, trying to do geophysical survey for the oil industry. That wasn't I didn't stay there long, but it was an interesting experience while I was there.
So as a child, what kind of things were you interested in?
Well, multiple things, sport, but science. At school, I probably focused on the science side of things mostly, particularly the math side. Actually, I felt that I had a natural ability for maths. I could see the numbers and I could do the numbers quite easily. So it felt natural for me when I was going up to secondary school to think about O-levels and maybe A-levels, to focus on the science side, and in particular the math side of things. I found it was I had a natural interest in it, and a natural interest in the scientific side of things as well. Less so the chemistry and the biochemistry and things, so you need to speak to my wife for that. But I was more on the physics side and the math side.
But as a child growing up in football crazy England, you must have also been interested in sports. Did you have any teams as a youngster?
I did. As you say, everybody did. I was very keen at sport, very keen footballer actually. I played for a lot of the local teams for many, many years, starting in school for the school football teams. The professional team that I followed hails back to the time when I was living in Hartlepool, and the biggest team near was Middlesbrough. And I ended up going to see Middlesbrough most of the home games, became a major fan. And here we are, I don't know how many years later, still a mad Middlesbrough fan, and I still support them now. I still go and see them occasionally whenever I can get a ticket. I'll still go and see them. But yeah, I used to play a lot of football, soccer, you would call it. Played for the school teams, played for the university team, played for a couple of local teams. When I was in North Devon, I played for one of the local sides where you show up at 2:00 for the kick-off, and the first thing you have to do is to clean the field of sheep and their what they leave on the pitch. Many a time is you go up for a header and the ball was slightly softer than you really expected, which is a bit of a shame. But good fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Good camaraderie.
And of course, Hartlepool, we can't forget about them. I mean, they're not as big a team as Middlesbrough, but I'm sure you're also a fan of them.
I did used to watch Hartlepool quite a lot. They were probably my second favourite team. As you say, you have to support the local team. They were a couple of divisions down from Middlesbrough pretty much all the time. But they were a good team to go and watch. They had a forward, I remember, this is going back 50-ish years, had a forward called Terry Bell, which was quite an unfortunate name. Everybody used to sing, "Oh, Terry Bell is terrible."
I just got it.
Yeah, I don't think his parents liked him.
Very interesting. So you went and studied physics. And later on, of course, you graduate in physics from London University. What happened next?
I took a couple of years doing various things. I had a job, as I say, in Saudi Arabia, doing geophysical survey, looking at strata, recording data, acoustic data from the strata in the rocks, and trying to work out where the oil-bearing and the gas-bearing strata were. But that wasn't a long sojourn in my life, mainly because I got the opportunity to study astrophysics at Oxford University, and an opportunity like that really only comes along once, and you say yes, please. And so I was lucky enough to go up. It meant that I moved from London to Oxford, and funnily enough, that was 40 years ago, and I've been in Oxford or Oxfordshire since then. But yeah, it was an opportunity to do some research, do a study for a doctorate in X-ray astrophysics, which is fascinating. I was fascinated in it at the time. It remains a fascination for me.
Now, in a nutshell, Rod, just for our listeners, in the simplest form, could you explain X-ray astrophysics for us, or X-ray astronomy?
X-ray astronomy. The kind of sources that I was studying were called massive X-ray binaries, and a binary is a pair of stars. It's, in this case, a massive main star, probably much larger than our sun, probably 5 to 10 times the size of our sun. And orbiting round it as a binary partner would be a compact object. So a white dwarf is one. I wasn't so much studying the white dwarfs, but black holes and neutron stars were the thing that I was looking at. Predominantly a neutron star. Actually, the main object that I was studying was a neutron star orbiting around a massive companion. And what happens with these things is that the neutron star, because it's very highly gravity-borne, will attract material from the massive object, and as the material spirals down onto the neutron star, because of angular momentum, it will spin around that star and it will form a thing called an accretion disk. And when it forms an accretion disk, there's so much friction with the material that it lights up, it heats up tremendously, much more energy than normal light and ultraviolet, and it gets so hot that it starts to give off X-rays. We can detect those X-rays with X-ray satellites which are in orbit around the Earth. Now, the fascinating thing about the particular object that I was mostly studying, which goes by the glorious name of AO538-66, by the way, nice sexy name. It was a neutron star, and it was spinning around a larger object, but it was in a very, very elliptical orbit of a period of about 17 days. And what that meant was that every 17 days it would dip through perihelion, the closest point to the star, and it would accrete a huge amount of material from the massive companion, but continue its path and speed out to the other side and then disappear for the next 16 days before it came back to closest approach again. And the effect that had was to have a huge outburst of X-rays and light and all forms of energy once every 17 days. And they were variable. Some of them lasted for maybe a few hours, some of them lasted for 3 days. And the trick was really to observe this. I was lucky, I was an observer, so the only way you can observe these stars is to go and get some data from a telescope. And the double whammy of luck was the fact that you could only see this object from the southern hemisphere. So I had to go and get time on the telescopes in Australia and Chile, South America, and South Africa as well. And I would go and gather the data, record the data, take it home, try and understand it, filter it, process it somehow, look at the photometry, look at the spectroscopy, and try and understand what was going on. And that was the model that I eventually came up with, this elliptical orbit. with the variable transfer of matter. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating in terms of physics. Fascinating.
That was recurring. I mean, it recurred every 17 days.
Yeah.
And every time it recurred, it was different.
Regular as clockwork, and it was mostly different. And one of the most interesting things is that it would go quiescent for maybe months, maybe 3, 4, 5 months. It would go quiescent, and that was when the massive object had subsided. So the neutron star didn't actually delve down underneath the surface of the star, and then something would kick it off again. Gravity would kick it off again, and it would the massive object would inflate, which meant that the next orbit around the neutron star would dip under the surface, accrete a lot of material, blast it off in X-rays, of course irradiating the massive binary as well, the massive star as well, which would make that inflate even more. So it's like a feedback system. So you would have a series of 16, 17-day events that gradually get brighter and brighter and brighter, and then suddenly they turn off because they've run out of material, and it'll be 3 or 4 months later before it turns on again.
Wow, interesting. And so some of this stuff, somehow or the other, this research would work its way into how you sort of entered the audio market. At some point, you formed the connection with solid state logic. Could you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, it's a funny one. People do say astrophysics on one side, audio on the other side. What on earth is the connection? And conceptually, it's actually quite straightforward. You gather data either via audio from a microphone or data at the bottom of a telescope. You recorder it, you filter it, you process it, which of course we do with plugins nowadays on audio, and then you output it somehow. So as a concept, it applies to both. Could apply to many other things, of course, as well. But the reason I got involved with solid state logic was because at the time I was writing up my doctorate, my DPhil, and looking around for a job, and solid state logic was literally down the road, 3 miles away from where I lived. They were in a little village called Stonesfield at the time. It was literally 3 miles down the road, and I knew they were taking on programmers and people who were interested in the science and this, that, and the other. And I got in touch with solid state logic and said, do you have vacancies? And I remember vividly met up with Colin Sanders. Bless Colin, wonderful, wonderful man. I met up with him on a Saturday. He phoned me up. I wrote a letter in. He phoned me up, said, come down now, Saturday lunchtime. And I did. We hit it off. He offered me a job to work as a programmer and a hardware engineer, actually, at the time, in their development group. And that was my introduction to audio. I spent 6 years, I think, at SSL.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. I did not see where you switched into becoming a computer programmer. Where along the pathway did you start programming computers?
I did very little programming until I went to Oxford for the doctorate. And the environment I was in there was all processing data, recording data from stars, obviously photometry or whatever. And really, I was left alone. I think a lot of the students were left alone to get on with processing the data the way they felt best, with very little guidance, to be quite honest, which meant that I had to start programming, start processing data, learn how to do filtering and various things like that. In fact, I was just thinking the other day that the tools have changed so much nowadays with the environments that people do programming and debugging and things. Back in the day when I started programming at Oxford with the astronomy data, it was all pretty much assembler, and the very first rudimentary starts of a programming language called C, so long before C++. And I did a lot of programming to process the data in those two languages. Predominantly it was C for the actual filtering and the analysis of the data, but collecting the data was by necessity in assembly language. Yeah, I had an old, I think it was a DEC 3200, DEC 3200, and it had 4 PCBs. 2 of those PCBs were memory cards, and each memory card had one kilobyte, where byte was actually 32 words, 32 bits, 4 words. But nevertheless, 1,000 32-bit words on one PCB, which was about 12 inches square. And it was real core memory as well. People talk about core memory. It was really little circles of magnetized material with a program wire and a read wire going through it. Remarkable, very expensive at the time.
So you had to use assembly with that kind of a circuitry.
Yeah. The funniest thing ever was the program I wrote to start the recording of the data had 2 instructions, and one was pause. It was a DMA transfer of data into a magnetic recorder, and you could get this all into one instruction. So you have the instruction, you program it with switches on the front of the computer, and each switch had a light, so you would turn it to 1 or 0, and you'd work out what this 32-bit word was, and you'd program it in, and then press go. Frightening now.
Yeah, but you know what? Those are the good old days. And
they are.
You know, for people like yourself, none of this stuff is impossible. It's you just apply yourself. It's like you said, when you go to Oxford, you're not being handheld so much. They just say, you know, there you go, get into the water and figure out how to swim.
Yes, yeah. Which personally I respond to. I do like that sort of thing. Remembering back, I could talk about paper tape if anybody remembers punch paper tape and punch cards, Fortran. I started in those days, and my abiding memory of paper tape is my supervisor at Oxford. When you go for a degree ceremony or a formal exam or something, in Oxford you have to wear this uniform called subfusk. It's a gown and a hat and a white shirt and a white bow tie. And my supervisor showing up for one of these events had forgotten his white bow tie. And we looked around and we thought, what on earth can we use instead of that? And we found paper tape, white punch paper tape. So we took, 12 inches of paper tape and sort of wrapped it around his throat and pulled it tight.
Because you had to have that or else no exam.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so you get into SSL, and what are you doing there? What are you working on?
Well, funnily enough, the first job I had was with the pipe organs. The reason solid-state logic is called solid-state logic is because they had a diode capture system for pipe organs, which is how Colin started many, many years before I was there. But I didn't work on that for too long, moved over to one of the consoles. They were starting a new design of a new console called the 5000, which was a modular design. And worked with, John East, a lot of people who are very well known at SSL, like John East, on that particular project, and worked there on a microprocessor computer system called Instant Reset, and then moved on to their digital project. They set up one of the first digital mixing, editing. The first product we had actually was an editor, I think called the O1, led by Peter Easty. We had a team there, including Bill O'Kentish and Chris McCulloch, Paul Frindle. And we worked on this digital project for 4 years or something. Very rewarding time. Very technically challenging, very interesting product to work on.
Now, when you say digital product, can you remember what options you had digitally? What were the computers like at that time? What did you really have to work with?
Well, we were embarked on building our own digital processor for that out of chips, and it was not a mean task, I must say. Possibly the best way to describe this is what happened next, actually. Moving on, I moved with Peter Eastie and three or four other people from Solid State Logic. We moved to Sony Corporation, to their professional audio department. And the brief there was to build a digital mixing console, a proper big digital mixing console, which is the thing that we refer to as the OXFR3. And Sony asked us to do a proposal for a big digital mixing console and how we would do it. And we looked at the available DSP chips at the time, of which the Motorola 56K was probably the predominant one. It had a big brother, which was just coming along, called the 96,000, but that thing never really saw the light of day, I don't think. And we looked at the 56K, and we looked at its instruction set and its power, and we looked at what we wanted to do in terms of a net list and a whole console, 64 channel, 128 channel console with a certain amount of processing per channel. And it was not going to fit into any number of 56Ks. You could add lots of 56Ks in a big array, but the communications between the chips just weren't there. So what we did was we designed and built our own DSP chip, our own ASIC, application-specific integrated circuit, which cost Sony. We did two versions of it. The first was £250,000. The second, I think, was £400,000 to design and build this chip. Now, at the time, you have to remember that this was 1988, 1990, so 30 years ago. So quite a lot of money, quite a big chip, quite a complicated thing. And we needed all the surrounding environment, so it had its own, because it was a new chip designed by us, it had its own opcodes, so we had to design and write our own microcode generator. We also wrote our own schematic capture system, because the vision was to lay out a net list of a console with the building blocks of EQs and dynamics and a mixing bus and various things that were necessary to design that schematically using a CAD system, computer-aided drawing system, and then metaphorically press a button on that, generate microcode from that schematic, and then generate the code which you would then put onto the chips which we designed and built, which we'd put in a big array on multiple PCBs. So it sounds horrendous. I mean, it did take us years for this project. I think we had a first prototype after about 3 years, and we then took some time to revamp it and to improve it. We then wanted to productize it, or Sony wanted us to productize it. And that was a slightly different phase, actually. The company changed. Well, we became employees of Sony Corporation.
So Sony at this time had its own foundry for making chips, or is this outsourced?
No. Funnily enough, they do now. Sony, of course, do make their own chips now, but at the time they didn't, or at least they didn't have the capability to make something this big. This was about the biggest chip you could get at the time, the biggest complexity. We dealt with a specialist ASIC design company in southern England, and we were at the time pushing boundaries, not only in the DSP but in the communications, actually, because the problem with trying to do all this sort of thing with flexibility is that you need to be able to translate into multiple chips, and you can imagine that the web of transfers of data between 400 different chips, when each chip can talk to each of the other chips in hopefully a maximum of 2 cycles, was quite a challenge.
Wow. So now you've got the this console at the time. So just take me back a little bit. These engineers were all originally at SSL. So why not just develop the console at SSL? They're a console company.
Interesting question. SSL at the time, I don't think had the willpower to build a big console. We were building a small editor, and that was the limit of the horizons. Sony came along and said, we want a big digital console. We want a flagship piece of equipment to sit in the center of the big studios. At the time, they had all the pieces of the big audio-visual studio that you would need, the cameras, or the editor, the vision editors, everything. The one thing they didn't have was the centerpiece of the audio, which would be a big digital mixing console. And they wanted it as a flagship so that they could basically sell to customers the ultimate in the audio and video studio.
And of course, they had a digital recorder at the time too.
They had a couple of digital recorders. Yeah.
The 24 and the 48 track recorders.
Yeah. Very expensive.
So they basically had the will, they had the drive, the ambition to create this. Was it hard for you guys to leave SSL though?
Oh, personally speaking, I found it incredibly hard. Yeah, it was very emotional. I loved SSL. It was a great company, great people. We had a wonderful time. Made some great products. Can't speak highly enough about SSL, actually. It was great time, great period of my life. But at the end of the day, we wanted to move on. We wanted to take this challenge on from Sony, which we did.
So now you've got this console, the OXFR3, and I remember this console when it first came out. It had lots of screens. It really didn't look like a traditional console. How long does it take to develop this thing, which sold, I believe, for $1 million at the time?
Yeah, it was a pricey item. It was scalable, assignable, scalable. You could have a mixture of I/O, but $1 million is pretty much a good estimate. It took us about 5 years to develop a prototype to the point where we had a proof of concept. And then I think it took about another 3 years, maybe 4 years, to actually productize it to the point where the sales team at Sony could go out and ask people for $1 million and then install the thing in their studios. We didn't sell a huge number. I think there were about 50 or so that were made over a period of 4 or 5 years. But in some big studios, in some very prestigious places.
Now, you guys were blazing a trail for digital, signal routing. Did you have any fear that it could rival the best analog signal routing on the marketplace?
What a very good question. SSL, of course, did make the highest quality audio consoles for many, many years. I don't think we ever really doubted that digital audio would have the quality sooner or later. The question was how long it would take before the technology is available, the chips are available, the bit widths are available, the audio conversions were good enough. I must say, analog designer that we had on our team, somebody that I think a lot of people know in this industry, Paul Frindle, was an absolute genius at the converters, the A to Ds and the D to As. Absolute genius, marvelous quality, and that of course is where it starts. You know, if if you have poor quality converters, then whatever you do with the DSP, you're not going to improve it much. But no, I don't think we doubted that finally we could get the quality really very high.
Now, and these converters, I should say, the conversion process of bringing an analog signal to digital, how much of that is science and how much of that is art?
Oh, Ray, goodness. Science underlies everything. There's a lot of black magic spoken in the audio industry about quality of gold cables and things. Paul is a scientist. He understands the science behind the conversion and works things out logically. But he also pays huge attention to detail of things like the layout of the PCB tracks, for instance, things which are very important. And that's where the art side of it, I think, would come in.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Now, this console was revolutionary. It looked amazing, very expensive. But inside, some of the DSP, some of the audio processing sections you had worked on, and these were sort of what became Sonnox plugins. Could you tell us a little bit about how the signal was processed in that console? When signal comes in, I guess you were using sort of plugins, they weren't called plugins, but these digital components inside were what sort of became plugins, correct?
Sort of. I think I might use the term algorithms. We had a lot of algorithms, which were software algorithms, which we built into the R3 via netlists using a CAD system, computer-aided design system. We would build up the picture of an EQ, say, and then compile it down to some micro instructions, and the micro instructions would then be the core of the algorithm, which would process the data on the chips, on the DSP chips in the R3. So yes, it came from actually what I would really say is a schematic, where you draw in the filter using AND gates, OR gates, various components like that. And build up the filters. And the beauty of that system is it's very flexible. You can change the algorithm very, very easily, recompile, run it, and listen to it as quickly as that. So in terms of speeding up design, at the time, we're talking 30 years ago, remember, at the time it was quite revolutionary, and it did enable us to refine the algorithms to a very high degree. Those algorithms, you talk about plugins, those algorithms were effectively what became eventually evolved into the algorithms that we use even today in the EQ and the dynamics of Sonox plugins, originally Sony plugin.
Mm-hmm. Now, what prepared you? I know you have this astronomy and data processing sort of background and scientific background, but what prepared you for this work, this audio processing work? How did some of the sort of skills that you developed with your PhD work at Oxford help you in this sort of algorithm development at Sony Oxford?
Well, I should come clean. I didn't do any of the algorithm development is the disappointing answer to that. I did a lot of the peripheral programming, a lot of the DSP design and things like that as a general programmer. But I've never studied filtering or DSP myself. I know the basics of it, of course, the rudimentary stuff. But I've never worked by building a filter, for instance, and listening to it. But other people have those skills.
Hey, listen, we have over there basically a library of almost everything that was ever made. And so I want to talk a little bit about this phase. These are Sony plugins, and it really was Sony Oxford at the time. So
yeah.
How much of this is coming from that Oxford console, as it was called?
Everything is the answer to that. To go back a little in history, we productized the R3 to the point where the software was mature, the hardware was mature. People could come up with a big checkbook and buy one and use it in their studios. And then as a design group, as an R&D group, we were looking around for ways which we could reuse some of the skills and the technologies that we'd got. And there were several ideas. The leading idea, or at least the leading idea that personally I got involved with, was to take the algorithm for the EQ and the dynamics originally, the first two, out of the R3 and to repurpose them as a DigiDesign Pro Tools plugin, as Avid was, of course, DigiDesign many years ago. They were the clear leaders in digital audio workstations, and they had the concept of plugins and things, which was fairly mature at the time. And one of the suggestions we had was to take those algorithms and repurpose them to TDM at the time, Pro Tools plugins. And we did it. This is about 2001. So yeah, 20 years ago. And indeed, as Sony Oxford, we set up a little business. We originally did the development of it, the programming, found that we had a market for these. We set up we took somebody on who would act as a salesman for us. We had a database engineer because of all the e-commerce system, which we then set up as well. And it was really a little group of 5 or 6 of us in Oxford, in West Oxford, Densham. Very, very separate from Sony. Even Sony Europe we were separate from, and we were a million miles away from Sony in Japan, in Natsugi, who we had worked very, very closely with for the R3. But their interests weren't in software and plugins. So it must be said that we set this business up with a handful of people inside Sony. And of course, one thing leads to another. And after a few years, we realized that it's ripe for a management buyout. Sony it wasn't really core business for Sony, even though it was effectively a self-contained business unit. We could hold our own. We could generate cash for ourselves, but Sony weren't really bought into it. So the suggestion came to buy the business out in 2006, 2007. And indeed, that's what we did. That's what I did. You go off, you try and get some money from various places, and you buy the business, you buy the licensing, you buy the algorithms, you buy the brands and everything. And that is what led to Sonox. And happily, the 5 or 6 people who were working on the team in Sony all came over. We set up. We were effectively doing exactly the same kind of work, but for ourselves, for the company Sonox instead of for Sony Corporation. And that was 2007, April 2007, so 14 years ago.
And so now you got your own company, but now you have the weight of responsibility of, making this company successful enough to at least pay the 5 people and generate a little bit of extra money. So what's going through your mind? I mean, is there a little bit of doubt, any fear, any sort of pressure that you put on yourself? Are you sleeping at night?
Fear and doubt are the 2 words I would pick up straight away. Yes, you're filled with all sorts of stories when you try and do this sort of thing. that most companies, at least in the UK, the anecdote is that most companies that start up fail after 18 months. And if they don't fail after 18 months, they will fail after 3 years. So it was a bit of a challenge to try and get to the 3-year point, which we did. We did quite happily. We increased the number of staff. We increased the number of products we had. And then, possibly a good thing to talk about in this situation is what happened 3 years after we set up, which was 2010. And that, of course, was major crack, which affected the business. Obviously affected our business greatly, affected many, many similar companies. I think everybody suffered from it as a result. It was a real game changer. And it did affect our cash flow for a long time. And yes, you do worry about employees, and you do worry about whether you can pay the employees' salaries. And they, of course, worry about paying their mortgages and getting food for their kids and this, that, and the other. So we could take a detour into IMSTA. Big fan, long-term supporter, as you know, Ray. I try to support as much as I can. And in terms of education of software and cracks and things, I think IMSTA does a wonderful job. The message that behind each piece of software, there are real people trying to program, trying to do a good job, trying to earn their salary, trying to pay their mortgage. And if the cracks come out and the software is given away free of charge, the whole thing collapses. The companies collapse. People lose their jobs. People can't pay their mortgages, and anything that fights that is a hero in my words.
And also, great products disappear. This product worked on a TC Works platform, and I remember TC Works. It was being run by Ralph Schlinson, a friend of mine.
That's right. I remember Ralph. Yeah.
And they were probably part of that major crack. And as a result of that, TC shut down TC Works. They were like, enough of this. So it really is a loss. I mean, we lost whatever development would have come from TC Works. And it's just ironic that your plugins worked on that platform, that ill-fated platform. But IMSTA, what we're trying to do is, very difficult. I mean, we're trying to change behavior, and we don't have a police force, an army. We don't have the courts and prosecutors. What do you think of the general sort of message? Buy the software you use. I mean, do you think there's any chance that it could succeed? Do you think we should keep doing it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it will succeed. There's no doubt. I've seen a change in the last 10 years since that crack in 2010. I've seen the industry change. I've seen people understand software properly and want to pay for quality software. They don't want, 99% of people don't want to rip off software. They want to have good support. They want to know that they're going to get updates from it. They know that it's going to perform. It's not going to crash. Undoubtedly, education has changed over the last 10 years.
So let's talk about some of these sort of iconic products from Sonnox. The Sonnox EQ. This must be one of your most successful products. It was one of the first products. Tell us a little bit about how that transition was made from the algorithm in the Oxford console to a plug-in format for people to use in their computers and in their DAW. The EQ, as you say, at first surfaced Paul Frindle design in the R3 console. We took it out as an algorithm and made it into a plugin. It still sells. It still sells very well. I would imagine that over the probably about 20 years now of the lifetime of that as a plugin, it's probably been our best seller, our best revenue generator. We have others which
sell very, very well. Nominally, the best one we have is a thing called the inflator, which is a small, very small plug-in, simple to use. It was actually also in the R3. I think a lot of people don't know that, but the inflator was in the center section of the R3. It wasn't called the inflator. It was called something else, but the algorithm was available for people who had paid their $1 million for the console.
And tell us a little bit about this inflator, because this is also legendary. In a nutshell, in the simplest way, what does it do?
Well, I obviously don't want to tell you the maths behind it.
Well, why not?
which is not overcomplicated, I have to say. But what it does, it inflates, it makes things bigger. I think the name, whoever coined the name, I actually forget in the midst of history who coined the name inflator. But that's what it does. It inflates the sound. It makes things bigger. It makes things have more presence. It's actually an unusual thing for us because it does, of course. I don't like to use the word distortion, but it does rather muddy the sound a little bit, which is something that Sony Oxford and certainly Sonox it is absolutely anathema to us. We want utmost in clarity and cleanness and accuracy of sound. And the inflator is probably the one thing that colours the sound. But it colours it in a way that we think we like. And I must say, in terms of sales, it's sort of everywhere. I mean, we've sold bucket loads of these things. Everybody uses it. We get story after story of people using it in Hollywood feature films or albums or, all over the place. The other one that came out of the R3 alongside the EQ was the dynamics, of course. Now that's actually a big plugin because it has compressor, limiter, all sorts of things in it as a single plugin. So it's almost a channel strip in itself, and that took a long time. That was the second product that came out as a Pro Tools plugin.
How long are we talking here? Give us a sense of how long it takes to take those algorithms from here to here, from the time you start, you conceive it, and the time it's ready to release. To take the algorithm for the EQ and the dynamics all those years ago, 20 years ago, to translate them into a Pro Tools plugin was not outrageous. I would have said about 18 months or so. It had the added complication that, of course, it was a TDM chip rather than a native product, which added a little time, but not an outrageous time. Probably 18 months of a couple of people working on it. But then you see, we already had the algorithm, we had the quality of the DSP already designed, we had the GUI, we had the front panel and the knobs and the operational and the feature set and everything defined. If you were to ask me now about one or two of our new products, which we have released recently and which we are on the point of releasing a couple more, how long and how much effort and how much cost it would take to generate a new plugin, we're really talking 2 or 3 years. For example, one I would like to throw right in, there's a dynamic EQ, which is quite a big project for you and a big plugin, lots of features under the hood. What's the development sort of timeline for a product like that?
The development timeline of that was probably about 2 to 3 years for our development team. Carefully worded because we don't have just one person working on these. We have different people that work at different phases of the different projects. But I would say 2 to 3 years. We have a new product coming out very soon, which is at the end of about a 3-year development period for one reason or another. And the thing maybe I should highlight there, not so much the time, but the cost, because you're paying engineers salaries for 3 years before you get any return on the investment. So running a plugin company is actually it's investment up front. It's money out, it's money on salaries, it's money with faith that in 2 or 3 years' time you'll have a new product. And then of course that product will sell and you get the money, hopefully you get the money back. But it's an expensive business.
Now, how different is the initial concept of this product to the final one that's released? What kind of metamorphosis are we talking here in terms of just the GUI, the feature set? In a nutshell, what are we talking about?
They can change dramatically. They really can change dramatically. We try as hard as we can to have a fixed spec, a fixed feature set when we embark on these things, because then you can have some rigorous planning and you can work out roughly when you are looking for a release. But with the best will in the world, it never happens that way, because intelligent people have bright ideas about things and the world changes and people decide that instead of focusing in one direction, maybe if we added this small feature, which would enable it to be applicable to that particular market, maybe sell more of them. I have been involved with some projects here which have changed tremendously from initial concept to release. Possibly the biggest example of that would be some of the restoration tools we did many years ago. We set about building a debuzzer, declicker, denoiser trio, and well, they exploded, but only exploded because of the possibilities that we suddenly realized when we were starting to develop it. We had idea after idea after idea of how we could refine it. The debuzzer is one good example of how we could tune in very, very carefully, very, very tightly, and monitor a waving sound. Possibly a better example is the declicker, actually, which halfway through we developed this thing and the science was working quite nicely, but we were struggling to control it, or should I say struggling to give feedback to the user so that they could control it accurately. We hit on this idea of having a square screen with size of click against duration of click on an XY schematic, which is indeed a display now that is incorporated into that product. And that revolutionized it. We only thought of the idea halfway through the design procedure. We programmed it up and we thought, man, this is just amazing. Because what you could do, we had an example of Night on a Bare Mountain, I think, Mussorgsky, where the brass comes in. And if you record it poorly, it can be over bright and brash and horrible. And you really need something like a declicker to take the harshness away from the brass. This is obviously not a regular declicking job. This is a different kind of job, but equally appropriate. And we realized that you could look on the screen, on this square screen, and see a particular area, a small area where all the distortion was. And so we hit on the idea, when we saw it, the answer's obviously, you set up a system where you can draw a square rectangle around it and then delete those clicks. And it works a treat. It's brilliant. But we never thought of that until we were halfway through, 2/3 of the way through the development.
Wow, so this is a highly interactive process. The development itself has feedback loops. Now, what's the balance? And I imagine probably the project manager, perhaps you, what is the balance between making it highly usable, friendly for the end user, and packing in as many features as you can? Because I'm sure this is something that you're constantly struggling with as to, how to how many features, and then how do you present it, and how people can use it, how you make it easy to use. How do you strike that the proper balance in Sonnox?
Well, it's not an easy thing. It's terribly, terribly difficult to strike the balance there. I think you just have to trust your own judgment. You have to trust your own faith. The first thing that we say is we would never release a product until we're happy with it. All of us are happy with it. So it has to overcome a particular threshold in use, functionality, quality of audio and things. But you are right. It's very easy to say we could just add this little feature. And then you think, well, little feature, is that 2 weeks or is it 3 months? And you tend to want to put the smaller ones in, and you tend not to want to put the bigger ones in unless they're revolutionary. It's very difficult, Ray. It's every case is individual. We have certainly in the past delayed the release of a product to add another feature. Funnily enough, one of the two that I referred to is coming along now. We've done exactly that. It has been ready for release for some time, and we've had another good idea of something that we made the decision that we wanted to add it in from version 1, and it was going to take an extra couple of months. So we're going to do that, and I think it'll be worth it. It'll be much more value for the users, much more usable. Just delay the release for a while.
Now, how do you know when it's good enough? I mean, it's like a chef, right? You know, you get the satisfaction of watching people eat your food. You get the satisfaction of watching people enjoy your plugins and writing you and giving you that feedback. But before it's released, how do you know inside of Sonnox that it's, you know, it's cooked, it's ready to go? I'm talking more on the audio quality side and the functionality side.
Yeah, the audio quality side is the easier one, to be honest, because you can measure it, you can listen to it. And if we listen to it and we all like it and we can't hear anything nasty, we're comfortable. The functionality side is probably slightly more difficult. But again, it's you have to trust your judgment. And I have to say, many is the time when people on our development team, we prepare for a release, we personally think it's good enough, but it's a leap of faith. You put it out on day one, and oh my God, you look for the first sale. You obviously send all the emails, do all the marketing, this, that, and the other. And you sit there and you think, well, what if nobody buys it?
or they all say it's crap.
Oh yeah, or we get this review back from a magazine. They say, don't buy this heater, you know. But no, we've been like, we haven't. That doesn't usually happen. People do buy our stuff, which is just great. Thank you, everybody.
And then you see those famous people that you respect, people that, you know, they're legends in our industry. They write you or they post something. How does it make you feel, Rod? I mean, you're the physics guy, London University guy, Hartlepool guy. Now these people, they're legends. They're sending you, maybe not even you're just reading about it. They're doing an interview. How does that make you feel? What do you feel inside?
Well, I think we all feel immense. It's wonderful to have an endorsement from somebody who's made their life in the audio industry and is very famous in the audio industry. One of the nicest things is standing on a trade show stand. People come up and say, "Oh, Sonnox, oh, I love your stuff. And it's so rewarding. It's so good for. We do try and get developers, people in the company, sales, marketing people, everybody in the company. I do like to try and get to a trade show, as frequently as possible, just so that they can appreciate the feedback that we get from people that seem to like the stuff that we do. So valuable, makes you feel $1 million.
Excellent. And now that you look back, you have this body of work, these plugins. They're being used by hundreds of thousands of professionals and many people beyond that. they're out there performing their function, helping people to be more creative, to create better quality audio. Are you happy? I mean, are you proud? I mean, do you feel there's a lot more to be done? Do you feel satisfied? You know, what's the feeling when you look back on that and you look forward?
Well, personally, I feel all of those things. I'm very proud of it. We do have a good reputation in the industry, which is hard earned, and we move heaven and earth to keep it. If I was to pick one thing, potentially, having set up a company and having worked for many years and taken a lot of good people on for jobs, I think possibly the thing that I find that I'm most pleased with is job creation. In this day and age, to be able to create jobs for people that they enjoy and we can give good salaries to, that makes me personally feel very happy. The employees, I like to think that we provide good jobs with good salaries for good people in a good industry. It might sound a little naive, but that's what I like to think that we can do and we are doing. It's a bit like, funnily enough, I was in London over the weekend at an exhibition on Iran, ancient Persia and the Zoroastrians. And their faith was based on good thoughts, good words, good deeds, which is a nice thing to live your life by. And as a modification of that, I think providing good jobs for good people in a good industry is something to be proud of.
Lately, we've seen a lot of sort of interest, and some companies are sort of forging into the area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like that. Does that have any interest for you and Sonox?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. We have flirted with our first machine learning product, which is the Drumgate, which we released, I think, over maybe 2 years ago, 18 months ago. And that was a learning curve. That was another one that took probably more than 18 months, maybe 2 years to develop. And we did, as a group, we did learn a lot about it. And at the end of the day, it's a very good product. And it does work very, very well. But there were times when it didn't during development for all sorts of reasons, which we now have experience in. But at the time, that was a product, I must say, which did provoke debate in the company as to whether we should persevere, because it comes to the threshold of performance again. There was quite a period where it didn't perform well enough. It didn't recognize the right beats correctly enough, well enough for us to be comfortable with releasing it. So then you think, do you can the project or do you persevere? Do you still try and do a bit more, get a bit more data, segment the data differently, learn in a different way? And it did cause some debate for a while. What actually happened is that we persevered with it, and the developers did a tremendous job of refining the algorithms and got it to the point where it did work well enough that we were happy with it. We did release it, and I think there's quite a lot of happy drummers out there, happy people who process drums out there that use it.
A lot of recording engineers are very happy to have that gate out those drum sounds. And this brings me to, one of the struggles it must be for every company is where ideas come from, what to research. You have a team. How do these ideas come? Do you allow them to experiment? Do you allow people to develop sort of in a star pattern? They can go off and do something within reason. How do you foster sort of the next big idea or ideas inside of Sonox?
Well, a couple of things there. One is that we have a concept of 10% Friday. So one Friday every 2 weeks, every fortnight, the developers have free time. They do roughly what they want. It has to be related to the audio industry, obviously. But they take advantage of that time by looking at different areas or maturing their thoughts in different markets and different products. They look at competitors' products, see where we could add value maybe. And that's a valuable time for a developer to be able to sit down without the pressure to sort bugs that they've got in their current software or something like that, to be able to sit down and do a little bit of blue sky thinking, blue sky development, the sort of what if. And I must say, in terms of ideas, we're not short of ideas. Goodness gracious, we have a list. We have a list on our development system of many new ideas, new products that we could be building. The trick is to select the best one, the most appropriate one to start working on. You release a product, a developer or two become free. What's the best one at that particular time to set them off developing as the next product from Sonnox? That's usually a little tricky.
And I imagine, Rod, you have a little bit of a role in deciding which one of these ideas should be pursued. What is that process like for you?
To get slightly more philosophical, I like to be an enabler nowadays. I am, I suppose, the figurehead of Sonox, but I have a great team. The staff here are wonderful. I have a great team working around me. And I'm very happy to delegate because everybody here is very competent and very good at their jobs. And I would go further as to say, not even delegate, but if I can enable people, if I can allow people to do the best job that they can do, then I'm doing my job. So maybe a long way round of saying, I'm happy that the people here are good enough that they can make decisions, they can invent products, they can make decisions about which products that we want to use, they can make decisions about marketing strategies and all of these things. And my job is to sit there and say, yeah, okay, go ahead. You can do that. It's a good idea.
Somehow I suspect there's a little bit more to what you do and what you say. But do you enjoy your role now? You're not really deep in the programming as much, but do you enjoy this phase of the Rod Densham story where you're kind of like, as you say, the enabler?
I do. There's no doubt I do. You're right, it is a long time since I wrote a line of code. Probably more than 10 years. And that's a shame. I used to enjoy it. The variety is the thing that I value nowadays. I'm doing so many different jobs, learning so much about. You set up a company, you have to learn about corporate issues, you have to learn about finance, you have to learn about the legalities of this, that, and the other. You have to talk to the accountants. You have to deal with HR problems. There's so many different things. Even before you start looking at pushing the company forwards itself. So talking to potential partners, developing new products like you've been talking about, having key relationships maybe with Universal Audio or with Avid or those sort of higher level operations. The days are never the same. They're always interesting. They're always dealing with different issues, different people, and by and large, very, very enjoyable. Love it. Love the industry. Love the people I work with. Love the company. It's great, and I love IMSTA as well.
Great, we love you too. You've always been a strong supporter of IMSTA from the beginning. Of course, you're on the board. And you're a guide. You're somebody that I respect your input and some of the things that you've said and some of the contributions you've made. So I want to say, stay with us, stay with IMSTA. There are a lot of people watching this who are, they love math, they love music, they love computers, they love technology, they want to make plugins, they want to be you, but it looks like climbing Mount Everest. It looks almost insurmountable. I want you to speak to them directly. What would you say to them? How would you encourage them, or would you encourage them They want to do this. They want to make their own plugins. They think they have some great ideas. What do you say, Rod?
Chase the dream. Chase the dream. Go for it. The couple of things I might say: be patient. These things do not happen overnight. Get your head down and work hard. The best employees that we have are the people that take an idea, program it, get on with it, don't make a fuss, and are busy. And I would say, if you're busy, you're doing something right. You're busy for a reason, and the reason you're busy is because people trust you to do a job, so they will give you jobs knowing that it'll be done well. So try and be busy in your job, try and be patient in your job, and before you know it, that hard work will pay off. The people who you are looking up to at that time will notice and will appreciate and will reward.
So Rod, tell me a little bit about Suppressor. This is one of the favorites of all Sonox plugins. Where did the idea come from, and how does it work?
Where did the idea come from? It actually came from one of our developers who was playing around one day and realized that actually we could take a band limited area and play around with the dynamics of it in a particular way. And we actually ended up with a series of products that could do similar kinds of things, maybe the inverse of a suppressor, which I think we were at the time going to call the Isogator, but it never saw the light of day. It may do one day. But yeah, that was a typical idea where one of the developers picked it up and ran with it, came up with a GUI, and we liked it, developed it, sold it, and success story. Nice product, self-contained, amazing. Simple to use.
Amazing product. Makes everything, just has such a great impact on sound, and so subtle as well. So what is next for Sonnox? I know you can't tell us all the products that are coming out, but what can you tell us about what's next for you?
Well, we do have a couple of things which are actually very close. We have been working on them for the best part of both of them, actually, for the best part of 3 years. So it's high time they were released. But as is always the case with us, we won't do it prematurely. They should be out in the next 2 months, 3 months or so. September, October, we're looking at, which will be nice for us. 2 new products in 2 months will be great. I think people might be a little bit surprised about one of them. One of them won't be a surprise. It's pretty much standard Sonox kind of thing with a little twist. Something that hopefully people will be able to use and enjoy using. And then we'll start looking at other new products. As I said a moment ago, we have a long list of things. We have a couple of favorites that should be quite quick, I think. So more new products. Life is good.
Now you've been generous with your time. Really appreciate you taking the time today, Rod. You've made a big contribution to our business, to the software community. The product map, the assortment that you have inside of Sonnox speaks for itself. You're selling plugins, the same plugin, essentially the same algorithm for many, many years. In fact, maybe now we can talk about decades. Really cementing the idea that the original concepts and the original algorithms were really just that good. And it really should be something that you would be proud of as an associate with IMSTA, as well as one of our colleagues. I want to thank you for all the support you've given us. And I want to say thank you on behalf of the entire software community for continuing to make these great products. You've cemented also a very solid reputation for yourself as a company. I think people have a very high sort of view of Sonnox. So the contribution has been really outstanding, and that sort of X factor of being associated with Oxford also didn't hurt you. So again, thanks a lot. And keep up that good work. Keep making those fantastic plugins. And, so many people out here who are watching this really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. Nice things to say. Thank you. And it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. Been a pleasure to meet you, Ray, all those years ago and work with you. Been a pleasure to be involved with IMSTA. Been a pleasure to work in the audio industry with plugins and things. So enjoyed every minute.